Once upon a time, in a kingdom surrounded by lush forests and flowing rivers, there lived a king named Armin. King Armin was unlike many rulers of his time. While he had all the wealth, luxury, and power that a king could desire, what truly defined him was his love for his people. From the moment he ascended the throne, he made it his mission to ensure that every villager in his kingdom lived in comfort, safety, and happiness. He believed that a kingdom is not measured by the grandeur of its palace or the size of its army, but by the well-being of its people. King Armin often held court in his grand hall, listening to petitions from nobles and ministers. Yet, he sometimes wondered if the issues presented to him truly reflected the daily struggles of ordinary villagers. Surrounded by opulent walls, servants, and advisors, it was easy to lose touch with the reality outside the palace gates. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and painted the sky in shades of orange and purple, King Armin made a decision that would change not only his life, but the lives of all his subjects. The next morning, he dressed not in his royal robes, but in simple, worn-out clothes. He disguised himself as a poor traveler, carrying only a small bag and a walking stick. Leaving the palace gates quietly behind him, he walked toward the nearby villages. He wished to see firsthand how his people lived, what they struggled with, and what joy or sorrow filled their days. As he entered the first village, he noticed the narrow roads filled with mud after the recent rain. Children played in the puddles, laughing, but their laughter could not mask the fact that their homes were leaking and weak. The king saw an elderly man struggling to carry firewood and a woman with a baby tied to her back trying to fetch water from a distant well. Marketplaces were cluttered, and villagers often argued over small disputes because they lacked guidance and resources. King Armin listened quietly, speaking little, observing everything with a heavy heart. He wandered through the villages from sunrise to sunset, speaking to farmers, merchants, and children. A farmer told him how pests had destroyed half of his crop, leaving him and his family hungry for months. A young girl spoke of her school being too far and unsafe, and how she often feared walking alone. A widow explained the difficulty of surviving without any support, while the elderly shared stories of sickness and neglect. The king took mental notes of every problem, every worry, and every tear he saw. When night fell, King Armin found a small spot under an old tree and rested, reflecting on all he had witnessed. For the first time in his life, he felt the true weight of responsibility, not just as a ruler, but as a human being. He realized that no wealth, no palace, and no crown could bring happiness unless his people lived with dignity, safety, and hope. His resolve strengthened. Tomorrow he would act. The following morning, King Armin returned to his palace and summoned his ministers, advisors, and the village elders. With a voice both firm and kind, he began to address the problems he had seen. He instructed that roads be repaired and widened so children could safely walk to school and farmers could bring their crops to market. Wells would be dug, clean water supplied, and new irrigation systems introduced to ensure that the fields flourished. The king allocated funds to repair homes and build shelters for widows and orphans, and he established free schools where every child, regardless of wealth, could learn and grow. King Armin also focused on justice. He ordered that village disputes be resolved fairly and quickly, so that no one lived in fear or mistrust. He invited skilled doctors and healers to serve in the villages, providing medical care to the sick. And, most importantly, he created a council that included villagers themselves, allowing them to voice their concerns directly to the king whenever needed. As days turned into weeks and weeks into months, the transformation in the kingdom became evident. Roads were no longer muddy and unsafe. Wells and irrigation channels were full and flowing. Markets buzzed with fair trade, and the laughter of children echoed freely through the villages. Villagers could see that their king cared not just in words, but in action. The people who once admired the king from afar now loved him more deeply than ever. They shared stories of the day the king had walked among them in disguise, listening to their struggles without judgment. They spoke of his humility, his compassion, and his courage to understand their lives so personally. Festivals became more joyous, communities more united, and a sense of trust blossomed between the ruler and the ruled. King Arman continued to rule with kindness and wisdom, always remembering the lessons he learned on that simple day of wandering among his people. He understood that a ruler's true power was not in his army, treasury, or grand palace, but in his heart, the care, empathy, and responsibility he carried for those he governed. His kingdom thrived, not because of fear or force, but because love, compassion, and justice guided every decision. And so the story of King Arman, the kind king, spread far and wide. He became a symbol of what leadership truly meant, a leader who listened, who acted, and who valued the lives of his people above all else. His legacy endured for generations, teaching that a good ruler's wealth is measured not by gold, but by the happiness and well-being of those he serves. And the villagers, grateful and content, would always remember the day their king walked among them, dressed as one of them, and saw their lives with open eyes and a compassionate heart.